Thank you everyone for being here, and to introduce those of you who are joining us online. Everybody knows our good friend PDG Roberto Silva joining us from Santiago, Chile. Roberto, what time is it now with the time change?
11
p.m. Thank you for being here with us. Ariel is joining us. We have club members joining us, Ariel and Dr. Rick Colby. Thanks for being here. And our friend Dan Smith is joining us from Roseburg. And for those of you that have been a fan of the new website and the district podcast, Dan is the mastermind behind all of that. So we're very,
Thank you, Dan. I've got to check that out.
Yeah. So thank you all for being here.
What's the name of the podcast?
Voices of Rotary.
I'm looking it up presently.
All right, and the only guest we have in the room tonight is our guest speaker tonight, and Heather, I'll turn it back to you to introduce him.
Very happy to do that. So for those of you who did not get the email or see the advertisement for our pinch hitter, and we had Food for Lane County scheduled and they had a conflict and had to cancel. And we have the board chair of StoveTeam International joining us. And quickly, I will introduce another guest as soon as he logs on. Hi, Dashawn. So Roberto, we have you beat on nighttime. Dashawn is joining us from Romania at 4 a.m. So
Thanks for being here, Dashawn.
good morning, Dashawn. Welcome back to Oregon. So again, we have Kim Forrest, who is the board chair of StoveTeam International, and we're happy to have her here. Oh, and another guest. If we could just wait until she logs in. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Cindy O'Neill is our past district governor, and we're happy to have her here with us tonight too.
My time to go. All you. Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Kim Forrest, and I am the board chair of StoveTeam International, which I'm about to tell you about. I also used to be a Southtown member in 5110 here for a few years, and I used to work for StoveTeam International as well. So I'm going to tell you today about what StoveTeam is, and I'm going to start with the issue of open cooking fires and why StoveTeam was started as a Rotary project, and then how StoveTeam became an independent nonprofit organization. And then for those of you who already know about StoveTeam, I'm going to catch you up on what we've been doing the last couple of years during COVID and how StoveTeam has been changing. And then if you have any questions, I'll leave time for questions too. So if we go, okay, so open cooking fires in people's houses. If you've ever been to another country, it's likely you've seen one of these. Basically like having a campfire in your house that burns all the time. Of course, this affects people's eyes and lungs, and if it's in your house all the time, it's not just an annoyance, it's a major health issue. So if we go to the next slide, we can see how after time, this is creosote with your fire burning all day long. This creosote collects on the roof and starts building on each other like stalactites. And it's doing the same thing in people's lungs as they're breathing this fire. So the World Health Organization calls open cooking fires the killer in the kitchen, and 2.6 billion people worldwide still cook their daily meals over open fires. So that's half of the world's population. And it's estimated that 4 million people die per year due to complications from open cooking fires. That's more people than HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. And that doesn't even include other problems such as kids falling into the fire and getting burned, women getting burned. And you can see here that this is an issue that mostly affects women and children because they're doing most of the household cooking and they're in the house most of the day. They estimate that they are breathing the equivalent of 3 packs of cigarettes per day. And this is actually the leading cause of death in children under 5 who get upper respiratory illnesses. We'll go ahead. So that's just another open cooking fire. And you can see that the other issue with this is it's not just a health issue, it's also a major environmental issue. The World Bank just released an article that the issue of open fire cooking is costing $2.4 trillion a year in damage to health, the climate, and local economies. And you can see here, one of the big damages is time lost due to gathering firewood. People are gathering 70 pounds of firewood each day and spending up to 20 hours a week collecting wood. So a lot of kids end up not going to school. People end up having to walk further and further into the woods to get the wood that they need in order to cook their meals. And that, of course, is leading to rampant deforestation across the world. The other issue with this kind of fire is it produces black carbon, which is very, very damaging to or contributing to global climate change in a major way. So StoveTeam exists because of this problem. And basically the goal of StoveTeam was to create a simple solution. So we can go ahead. A simple solution to open cooking fires. And if you're familiar with this project, you would know Nancy Hughes, who's in the middle here, and she started StoveTeam along with a team from Aprovecho Research Center, which is down in Cottage Grove, who helped her design a simple, affordable rocket stove that could be provided to people. So that's a rocket stove there. And if we go ahead one, you can see the design of the rocket stove. So it was designed to be more efficient and also be cool so that if you touched it, you wouldn't get burned. And then also it just uses much less wood than a traditional open fire. So the other, so the other thing that they did when they started StoveTeam is they wanted to make the stoves in country. There's lots of people who are making these in other places and shipping them to where they're used, but StoveTeam wanted to actually employ local people. And so it was Southtown who started a factory in El Salvador based on a global grant back in 2008, I want to say. And they funded the first round of 1,000 stoves to be produced by this factory to give them the cash flow to get the program going. And on the next slide, you'll see, working in the factory. And then this is Gustavo, who is still running this factory in El Salvador after 12 years. So he's been very successful. He has lots of different stove designs now, and he's been a major partner for StoveTeam. So since then, StoveTeam has started factories in Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. And I worked for StoveTeam for a while, so I saw how each of these places has unique challenges in getting people to use the stoves, to buy the stoves, and then also political challenges, economic challenges, marketing challenges. And so currently our most successful projects that are still running are Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. So since we've started, there's been about 80,000 stoves distributed, and we estimate 1 million tons of CO2 has been prevented from entering the atmosphere. And this is Alita. So that last picture, that's Alita, who operates our partner factory in Nicaragua. And she actually, that was also started by a Rotary project, and that Rotary project was through Springfield. They did that global grant, and she has since bought the factory from the nonprofit who helped start it. So she will be, she's making payments, and she'll be a full factory owner within a couple of years. And that's been very successful. In Nicaragua, people really love these stoves, and we're actually only having to subsidize about 25% of the stove. So StoveTeam puts in $25 and the recipient puts in $75. And so it's a really sustainable project. So this is the new stove I was going to tell you guys about. This is the new pilot project of this Husta stove is what it's called. It uses that rocket stove design, so it's very efficient, but it requires 50% less fuel than an open fire, reduces smoke by 100% because it vents it out through the chimney. And it's tested and it saves 6 tons of CO2 per year. So one stove is equal to 5 years of smoke-free cooking. It's also really successful because this is the kind of surface that people are cooking over an open fire. It's like a pit with then a long plancha on it. And so it's more like what people are used to, which is why we introduced this. And if we go to the next slide. So one change that StoveTeam has made is that now we have a Guatemalan NGO that is staffed entirely by local people. And we have one in-country kind of central staff member from StoveTeam who manages this NGO. And they actually employ a crew of local stove builders. And they also go into communities and train community people to be stove builders as well. I don't know what that is. That might be, okay. And then a lot of our stove builders are women. So we can go ahead and.
My name is Eva Hernandez. I work for StoveTeam as a stove builder. Sometimes you find out that you have certain talents that you didn't know you had. As it turns out, we can all learn new things, whatever we want to learn in life. We can achieve whatever we dedicate ourselves to. There are people who say they didn't know a woman is capable of doing this type of work. But now women tell me that they are encouraged and realize now that there are opportunities in life to move ahead. Women say that seeing me do this work encourage them to move forward in their lives. That they see opportunities in life where a woman can learn to do any type of work. At first, I didn't think I was capable of doing this work. I felt like I wouldn't be able to do it. Then I realized we are women and we do have the ability to do anything we put our minds to us. I have made it a goal to learn how to do this work. Now, I'm a stove builder. I've been able to show the woman that it's possible, that we can do it. And I'm also showing women that you can use a better thermal stove, that you can change your lives by moving away from using an open flame. I think it is really interesting to help families in this way. It is very important work for the environment, for the financial well-being and the health of the people. It makes me happy to be part of their organization and be able to help other people. I'm a son. Thanks to StoveTeam, I have a job. I think it's necessary to have more women working to be able to help with the family experiences. StoveTeam has brought work to the communities. Thanks to StoveTeam, I have a job where I can give my family a better life and also help with the economic situation for other families. Thank you, StoveTeam, for giving women this opportunity.
Yeah, so one big focus we've had for the last couple of years, obviously, is recruiting more women into becoming stove builders. And we found they have better access to the houses and also they can talk to women about using their stove. So it's really great. It's a more comfortable way for us to go into somebody's home rather than sending a strange man in there with women and children to send another woman. It's been really well accepted. And we've been able, some of the people that are now building stoves were people who were cooks at the factory before, things like that, who had been around and then got an opportunity to do something that's a little more active than traditional women's roles. So it's been really neat to see. So this is also, I just wanted to mention that we have a new method of making sure these stoves are adopted, and we're doing this because we're getting, well, because it's the right way to do it. And then also it's allowing us to get carbon offset certified. So we'll be able to sell carbon credits here within the next year. We're going through that process now. So basically we do community introductions, first of all, and then we do a house inspection to figure out where the stove should be. And then we have people come in and build the stove. So that's Betty. She was a cook at the factory for years and years. And then when we started this Husta project, we asked her if she would build stoves, and she had never even, she cried and she had never even thought that she could be a stove builder, but now she's out there building stoves. So then we do the install, and the training. That's Gustavo's son, who's now taking over the factory, is doing the training to make sure they understand the stove. And then we come back 1 week later, 1 year later, and every year to make sure the stove is in good situation and to track to see if they're using it or just to see kind of what's going on, if it's still intact. So basically, we're taking kitchens that look like this and changing them into kitchens that look like this. So they're still using wood, which is a very abundant or a more abundant resource than, there's no electricity that comes in here. There's no, a lot of times no propane that goes to these communities. It's really their only resource they have to burn, but they're burning a lot less and in a much safer way. And then we also go in and we do scientific monitoring of the stoves. Well, we can actually skip that part there. But here we're doing a fuel use study. So we'll go in and we'll measure how much fuel they're actually using for the stoves. And that's part of our carbon certification as well, and how we can know how much CO2 we're actually saving. So that is all I have to share, I believe. Is there one more slide here? Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Yeah.
What does it cost to build one of these?
So hang on, Rose.
What does it cost to build one of these stoves?
So the Ecosina, it costs about $85 to $90 now to build the Ecosina, and then the built-in place Husta stove is $130 now. And we ask that the families provide the base, and we provide everything else. Depending on the country, in Nicaragua, mostly people are paying for their own stoves, and we're just subsidizing it at a cost of, I think, $25 per stove.
I'm also curious, what kind of wood are they using to burn?
Whatever they collect around. So each of these CO2 studies, we have to do it by country, because you'll actually get different numbers for Guatemala and Honduras, or the different parts of the country based on how humid the wood is. So part of our carbon certification, we go and we measure in each specific community to get a good idea of that.
I had been on a StoveTeam
Oh, yeah.
trip. It's been, gosh, maybe 10 years ago, but it was wonderful in Guatemala, Antigua, and I actually was on a team that went into people's homes to measure the wood at the beginning and then measure it again at the end to see how much they
Exactly.
used, and so it was fascinating. But I wondered if you mentioned before I got in here about how this actually was, what inspired Nancy to start.
Well,
this project.
Nancy-
It's kind of an interesting story.
Yeah, so Nancy, who started the project, she was on a StoveTeam International trip, or potentially a HELPS trip. And she was working with burn victims. So she was inspired by the burn victims to start the stove, to start giving stoves. And then all the other health benefits she learned about through that experience of helping the burn victims. Yeah.
Three questions. So you mentioned, I think, 80,000 stoves have been installed. So what is the demand or the need for stoves in this part of the world? And what about other parts of the world? Have you begun looking at any other parts of the world? Does the carbon certification, that's additional effort and labor on your part? Is that like is that paid for itself? And how is that? I'm curious about the economics of that. I had a third question, but I'll stop it too.
Yeah, so I'll start with the carbon one. That is going to be a funding mechanism. So the goal with the carbon certification is to be able to sell those credits to make it a self-perpetuating cycle. And of course, we're having to invest in from the get-go in getting the monitoring and evaluation needed to get that, which does cost some of our resources, but it also is, we're able to track our adoption rate, we're able to track where stoves are being used, and also a lot of the grants we apply for now, including Rotary grants, they really want to see that follow up, and especially the health impacts and environmental impacts. So it is an investment, but it's made us take it to the next level as far as making sure that we're getting those stoves in with people who are going to use them and know how to use them and will continue to use them. And then as far as the need goes, yes, there's need everywhere. And we're just one small project that's very hyper focused on Central America, but there's these projects all over the world And at one point, StoveTeam did try to expand when they were doing more of the team trips. And there's so much need right where where we are, especially, well, in all three countries. There's so much need that we're not able to fulfill, that we need to scale to even fulfill the need in the communities that we've committed to serve. That right now we're not really interested in going anywhere else.
Can you quantify the need in Central America?
I could quantify the need in, say, for instance, just the three communities. So the three municipalities that we're working with in Guatemala. Among those three, there's around 5,000 households that have been identified that are interested and need stoves. And in order for us to do that, that's going to, that's several years worth of funding and work. Just to fulfill that need for 5,000. And then, yeah, I mean, it's half of the world's population. So it's like, it's an astounding amount of need. And there's so many people working on this in the stove community. Aprovecho down in Cottage Grove, they work with people from around the world who come here to create a stove that works for their culture specific cooking style. That will be accepted by people because of course, it's so dependent on the culture, what kind of stove people want. And we're refining our stove all the time. Like now we have in that Pusta stove, we've added removable rings because people want to be able to take those parts out and actually like set a pot down in there is something they do for cooking. So we've started adjusting the style for that. And it's just so it's hard to translate a stove from one place into a stove from another place.
I can answer a little bit that question that you had, Chris. Nancy went with my wife to Africa to look at opportunities with her. But it was just, I think, just so overwhelming problem there. And she probably felt that, people out of Europe maybe do a better job there. But I also wanted to point out that just in last week, there was an article about Nepal where I spent a lot of time. And about 50 years ago, they got to a point where they had almost no forest because they were burning open fires and cooking everything with it. And it did keep because it was cold there. But they converted everything to kerosene there and were able to grow back many of their forests. So there are multiple ways of dealing with this problem. You mentioned that propane is a problem. Is kerosene also a problem getting to?
I know that right now we're not looking at alternative technologies, but we did change StoveTeam's mission a few years ago to be supporting. I should know it off the top of my head, but exactly what you're talking about, to not say providing fuel efficient wood burning stove, but to remove that wood burning in case we have an opportunity or the technology advances that it would make sense to replace it. Right now, I think in the areas that we're at, it makes sense to use wood. But yeah, there's people doing all sorts of interesting stuff like, with also all types of biomass, like dried dung and recycled this and recycled that. And
But it seems like Guatemala still has plenty of forests. And so the cheaper option, whereas Nepal, they just got to cut down all their forests.
yeah, especially in some of the areas that we are. And just getting people transitioning to use a stove versus an open fire is a good step to then move them to a different type of stove as well. Because adoption is the main thing that we struggle with, that we're really working on.
You mentioned $100 as the cost of the stove, with the recipient having to contribute $75. It seems like $75 is a lot of money in that world. How are they able to come up with that?
I don't actually know the answer to that question off the top of my head because I haven't worked with that Nicaragua factory much. But I do not, I know in other areas we've struggled to get more than about $15, which is the contribution we're asking for in El Salvador and in Guatemala. So I'm going down there, so that'll be an interesting thing to find out with that particular factory owner, how she's been so successful and how people there have the cash to spend on this.
I think this is a wonderful enterprise, and so thank you. I'm also wondering, about some of the cultural, challenges that you face. I know that we bought at our own home a fancy electric stove, and I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm gonna shy away from it. Can you tell us a little more about what efforts are made to sustain, the cook's interest and, to have these, stoves working over the long term?
Well, first of all, I think we've done a better job at the get-go than a lot of organizations to make sure the people who are getting the stoves are actually requesting them. So there's a lot of pre-vetting that goes on now as far as people saying, yes, I want it, and I want to have a cleaner cooking environment. If you go into the stoves before and after, or into the houses before and after installing the stoves, the difference in the amount of smoke is really glaring. So I think people use them and then become believers. Our biggest obstacle has been stove stacking. So we have very few problems with people using the stove, but it's just like when you get a new piece of equipment in your kitchen. Now you've got a toaster and an oven. So while you're cooking something in the oven, you can put something in the toaster, right? So people will keep their open fire and use their stove. And that's the main challenge that we have when we talk about full adoption and getting rid of that open fire. So we've done a lot of health education projects focused on kids and focused on the women. But it is a struggle to get people to fully convert over. And that is one reason that we're developing the Husta. The Ecocina is great, but it's small, and trying to cook for a family over that small of a stove has made it hard for people to totally adopt it. So the Husta seems like it's really helping solve that problem. But the Ecocina is still very successful and a great stove as well.
Are you still taking groups of people down there as a volunteer sort of thing?
So we had our last volunteer trip before COVID, and I don't know when they're going to come back. So we've talked about it, but we don't have any plans right now. Mhm.
Great experience.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, are there any of our Zoom participants who have any questions for these, jump right in?
I've got one, Steve.
Oh, Heather, go ahead.
PDG Cindy asks, how does a Rotary Club now engage with StoveTeam projects, just funding or?
So yeah, of course, funding is always an option. We have a great template for Rotary clubs that want to get engaged in that way and provide funding. So I could, if you want to get involved, you guys can let me know and I can hook you up with the executive director to talk about that. Other ways to get involved, of course, the team trips, when those happen again, is also a good way to get involved. But traditionally, we mostly engage with different Rotary clubs with just funding and, yeah, grants and things like that.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then Kim, thank you so much.
Oh, I should mention, so I'm going down with our executive director to Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala in a couple weeks. And so I think that we are going to do a couple of live broadcasts via Instagram or Facebook to show somebody cooking over a stove. There's going to be a stove builder training we're going to broadcast, and then also a factory visit with Gustavo and a factory visit with Alita, and then a cooking demonstration. So I think we're going to do 4 events that will both broadcast and then record. So I'll send you guys information about that. And that was Heather's idea. So thank you, Heather. She was like, why don't you film it and show people?
Then we get to go.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
All right, then if there are no other questions, we'll proceed. So I skipped right over the quote of the week, which we'll bring up now, just merely as an exclamation point on what Kim talked about. So does anyone have the quote of the week?
About 3 million people in developing countries rely on firewood or charcoal for their daily cooking purposes. Smoke-induced diseases are responsible for the death of 4.3 million people every year. More deaths than caused by malaria or tuberculosis. And that's a quote from the WHO.
Okay, thank you. Other announcements, we'll just remind everyone, Stream Team is coming right up on us, December 3rd. I guess it's almost time to start looking at the weather and see what we're in for, but I'm sure it's going to be a rain or shine event unless the rain is really wild. So mark your calendars. It's oh, not again. Next week, November 22nd, was up at the social meeting, which will continue to have a social meeting. I said before that I would not open a Zoom link, but I'm going to, because what we're doing is scheduling new member biographies. So we've got at least 3 lined up, maybe 4. And yeah, so we would invite everyone's participation in learning a little bit about our new and very interesting club members.
Yes.
So that's coming up, and let's see, other announcements. Scott.
Yes, as some of you know, I've been volunteering with the Eugene warming centers, and last night was the first time in its history, over years and years, that they set up 2 places for people to take shelter in the below freezing weather, and then they couldn't open the doors because they didn't have enough volunteers. So they're in real need. You don't have to stay all night. The wonderful thing about it, if you log on to Eugene warming centers, that's easily found on the web. You can then there'll be a drop-down list a couple clicks away where you can volunteer for a 2-hour shift. I'm going to go in the morning, for example, at 7:30 in the morning to help clean up, and by 9 o'clock, this particular warming center, the Lane County Events Pavilion, will be spotless, and we'll move on to our next site. You need people just to buy coffee, to buy a hot bowl of soup, which is all there, but they need people to help serve it, to greet the guests. So last night, 120 people were at shelter. There were two calls, 911, for medical reasons, and you can imagine if these people were out in below 30 weather, having to deal with life's traumas as well as their own. I guess this is my plea. If anybody's interested, see me after the meeting. I can talk a little bit about the volunteer opportunities, and I'm also would be interested if there is interest here. We provide help to the homeless during the day with several feeding programs. Maybe this is one way that we can offer shelter as well. The good thing about this, or bad, depending on your point of view, is that it happened. They open up the shelters whenever the temperature drops below 30. So that means our commitment, our contribution is just could be a night, 2 nights in a year. And they have the requirement that you're always with somebody else, so safety it's not been an issue. At any rate, if anybody has more interest in doing this, I'd rather chat afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Quickly, Scott, if you would spell out your email address and your phone number, and people can jot that down, and maybe Warren, if you could throw it into the chat.
I'd like to provide my own. I think perhaps most helpful would be just the URL for the Eugene warming centers, which is it's EGAN warming centers. There's an S there, .org, or easier, just type in Google Eugene and then up it pops.
No.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
So I got an email this week from an organization called Braver Angels. I don't know if anybody's heard of the predecessor to this group, which is called Better Angels. They're a nationwide group that is a nonprofit, in all 50 states. They does training and workshops to bring people together from opposite sides of the political spectrum. And I was involved in trying to get a Lane County chapter started about 5 years ago. The effort was basically petered out for lack of participation by conservatives. So this is my appeal to you to talk to your conservative friends about the opportunity to participate in this cross view discussion. There's a workshop this Saturday, 2 to 5 p.m. called Families and Politics. I did attend one of these workshops in Salem about 4 years ago, and they're really, really well done, facilitated workshops. Have you been to one as well, or?
I saw a presentation from them in Sausalito. Thank you. I saw a presentation from them a week before quarantine, actually, and I have been emailing them. I think I've requested a speaker from them twice and never heard back. They are awesome. It is such an incredible organization. And the thing that they talked about is they did a road trip, the one that they featured. And it was a super conservative dude and a super liberal guy. And they did a road trip together and they filmed it. And it was them talking about kind of like Brian's talk, actually. What do we have in common? What are our shared values? And they find that common ground. It's incredible.
So I have an email here. If anybody is interested, just let me know. I can forward it to the to individuals, or it can be circulated to the distribution list. I'll defer to Steve on that.
Are there any other announcements?
So as your greeter, you have a guest that snuck in. Or hopefully if you newest member Ann, help me welcome Ann. And you have an application.
Well, let's get that going.
We need to schedule coffee to fill out your application.
Oh,
okay.
Oh.
Well, over.
I don't know.
Cheryl.
Okay, don't let her sneak away.
I won't. I know where she lives.
Track her down.
Drink wine.
You guys had a fundraiser for a shelter box last year. Quite a success. Greg and I were talking at a home show. We usually do a home show and have a big booth in January. We're not doing it this January because we're concerned about COVID, et cetera, et cetera. But it looks like we'll be doing the one, well, we should be doing the one in March. And we'll be looking for volunteers. And you can buy your own lunch.
All right, just keep posted on how many you're looking for, what the some of the specifics are, what dates, what hours. So just update us. to get there.
Thank you.
Any other announcements? Anybody from online? If not, then we will jump into the happy dollars part of the evening. And I'll go ahead and start with $5 happy dollars. Kim, thank you so